Welcome back. What we're going to talk about in this video is typography in processing. That is how we're going to create fonts and then display text on our display window. And along the way we'll also involve a little more selection in the process, and we'll use, I think, the switch statement in our next example. Okay, well, processing is different from many other types of programming languages. A lot of other programming languages are called console-based languages or have console-based output. And what that means is it's like you're using a teletype with a scrolling piece of paper and you're typing on that teletype. And the program responds by printing on that paper as well. Obviously we don't use real paper anymore, but we use a terminal window or a command prompt window instead. Well, in those types of programming languages, you can print text very easily. Okay, so let's take a look at an example using C++. Okay, what I have here is a terminal window in my Macintosh computer. This would be akin to a command prompt window in Windows. And what this is like a simulated teletype. So I'll type commands and the computer responds. So I'm going to type a command that tells the computer to bring up an editor to look at this C++ program. Okay? And so it's brought up this program. Now we can see in the program that there are several lines, and even if you don't know C++, a lot of it should look sort of familiar because it has the same basic syntax as processing does. In any case, this line here with the cout is going to print something on the terminal window. And then I'll get some input from the terminal window and finally print something back out again. And then the program ends. So if I run this program, it prints on the screen on the terminal window as a prompt. I enter my information, and then it responds with one more piece of information back. Okay, this is roughly like what we did with our dialog box input and output in previous chapters. But notice how easy it was to get the program to print things out in the terminal window. Alright, processing isn't like that. It's a little bit more complicated. So now let's go ahead and talk about processing. Alright, in processing, there's a four-step process that's involved when we want to draw text on our display window. The first step is that during development we have to create the font that we want to use via some tool that ships with the integrated development environment. So we have to specify the font we're going to use to display our text. After that, in the program itself, in the setup method usually, we're going to load the font in a very similar manner to how we load images or sounds. And if we want to have different fonts for different pieces of text, we can do that. Continuing on with the process, then you have to specify the font you're going to use to display text the next time that you draw it, either in setup if everything's going to use the same font, or right before you actually show the text if you're using different fonts. And then finally, after that, you can show your text. Okay? So what I'd like to do now is take you through a quick demo to show you how to go through those four steps. And in that demo, we're just going to print or display some text in the middle of our display window. And then we'll move on to a more complicated example. Alright, now here in processing, we're going to go ahead and follow those four steps to go through to display some text. First thing is to use our font creator to make a font that we're going to display with. So to do that, you go to the Tools menu of your processing IDE and select the Create Font option. And that will bring up a dialog box, and this dialog box shows you all the different fonts that you have installed on your computer, and you can take any one of those and make it available to your programs. Basically what happens when you choose a font and a size is that this tool sort of graphifies, if that's a word, makes that font into a bitmap that will then be displayed on our display windows pretty much like a picture would be, or an image. So you can change the size and get a preview for how big or small your font's going to be. You can choose the bold or the condensed versions, whatever. You have all kinds of choices here. It's important to note the file name that it's going to use, because we need to know that exactly when we load a font, just like we need to know an image name exactly when we load an image. So I'm going to go ahead and create this font, and note that it's American Typewriter Condensed 24. In fact, I'm just going to copy that into the clipboard because I'll use it in a minute. So click OK, and it's created the font. The way you'll know is if you open up in Finder or Windows Explorer the folder that contains your program, this fonttest.pd in this case. After you've created a font, there'll be a data directory, and inside the data directory is the font that was actually created. Okay? Alright, so let's go ahead and continue with our four-step process. We just did step 1. Step 2 is to load the font. And since I'm going to be using this font in several places, loading it in Setup, displaying text with it in Draw, I'm going to make a pfont variable as a class variable. Okay, so pfont is the object type or the class type for fonts, just like pimage is the type for images. Alright, in Setup, let's go ahead and size our window, and then we're going to load our font with the load font method call, and this is where I can use that piece of text that I put on the clipboard, because I need to know the name of that font exactly. And the other thing I'm going to do is I'm going to set the alignment of our text so that when I specify coordinates, I'll be specifying a point right in the middle of the text. And that will allow me to align it right in the middle of the screen in a much easier way. You can read about the details of that text align in the textbook. Alright, now in Draw, all we're going to do is erase the background. Oops, better put a color in there. And then show our text. Oops, I forgot step 3. Step 3, this was step 2, was loading the font. Step 3 is saying which font we're going to use. Okay? Now, step 4 is to actually draw the text. So I'll draw some text, and I'm going to put it right in the middle of the screen. Okay, so let's run this and see what happens. There we go. There's our program with the text centered in the middle. You notice that the text is white. If I wanted to change the color of the text, I would change the color of the fill. Now I should have red text. There we go. Okay. Now if you wanted bigger letters, you would go back out to your font menu and choose a different size. Okay, there are some things that scale fonts inside your program, but they're not very reliable. So I'd recommend making the font as big as you need initially. Okay, so again, 4 steps. First step, create your font. Second step, load the font. Third step, choose the font you're going to use to display your text, and fourth step, actually show your text. Alright, so that's a quick demo of how fonts work and typography works in processing. Let's go ahead and move on to another example. Okay, in this example, what we're going to do is write a program that displays some text in the middle of the screen, and the actual text that's displayed and the color of the text will be chosen based upon the user's keystrokes. Okay? So this is in the textbook, and I'm not going to go through a full whiteboard design on this, but I'll just pull up the flowcharts that are included in the text and we'll go through them real quickly. So in our setup method for this program, we'll size the window, make everything look fancy by turning on anti-aliasing, load and configure our font, and then finally pick the default color and string that will be displayed. Okay? Our draw method will be very simple. All we'll do is erase the background and draw the string. So our string variable will be something like an alias that we used with the pictures. It will point to one of 4 different strings depending on what the user inputs. And then in key pressed, we'll use a switch statement based on the key variable, and if the user types a big B or little b, we'll choose blue as our color and blue as the string. Same for G and R, green and red respectively. And then if they type anything else, we'll go ahead to the default fill and string, which will be white color and none. Okay, so that's our design. In terms of the actual sketch, what I've done here is input already many of the different comments and all those pieces that were that are in the text, and we'll just put in the font and decision-making things around them. Okay, so up at the top, the first thing we've done is we've created a series of color constants so that we don't have to type this color method call repeatedly, and also it's a lot easier to understand what color we're using if it's a constant in English as opposed to a color method call. Alright, then we have our variable that we're going to use to display the text, and since that's referenced both in setup and in draw and in key pressed, it needs to be a class variable. Okay, in the setup method, normal things like sizing the window, turning on anti-aliasing, but now we'll go ahead and load and configure our font, and in this case the font's already been created, so I'm going to go ahead and just make this a local variable because I'm not changing it. I'm not using referring to the font outside of setup in this case. Like that. And then we need to go ahead and set this to be the font that's used when we display text. We do that with our text font method. Okay. And I'll show you the second way to use that method. In the previous example, we just put text font, and what that did is used it as at its default size. And this is where you're able to change the size inside your program if you want to. Again, making this number 48 different from the size that it was loaded as is going to result in some weird looking fonts, particularly if you enlarge it. So it's better to go ahead and just make this as big as you need it, this font, when you construct it. Now we'll use that text align again to make it be centered when we display our text. And then finally we'll set our string that we're going to display to say none, and we'll make it be displayed in the white color. Okay? In draw, we erase our background message, or a background screen. So we blank the screen, basically, blank the display window, and then we're going to show our text. In the previous example, the text was in quotes as a literal string. This demonstrates that you can use a variable, string variable as well. But I'll do the same thing as I did in the previous example, displaying that text in the middle of the screen. Alright, so let's go ahead and run this, make sure it works so far. And there we go. So it is displaying the none string in white in the middle of the screen. Now it doesn't respond to key presses yet because we haven't written that part, but at least it shows what we have included so far. Okay, so now let's go ahead and do our decision making. We're going to use a switch statement based on the key variable. And our cases for the switch are all going to take advantage of the flow-through behavior. Okay, so what I'm going to do is put both the lowercase and uppercase b cases together. And so if the user types the lowercase b, the first case will be matched and then immediately flow into the second case, the uppercase b, which is where we'll do the work. So in this case, I'm going to fill with the blue color, make my string say blue, and then we'll break. Okay? Now what we need to do is repeat these for all of our different colors. Okay? For green, it'll work the same way. Taking advantage of flow through there. And then breaking after our case. Red, similar. And lastly, we'll have our default condition where we fill with white and make our string say none. Alright, so now our program should respond to keyboard input. So right now by default it shows the none string and white is the color. If I type the R key, it's red, and that works. B works, G works, and that works for lowercase or uppercase, and anything else goes back to white. Okay? So there was another example using fonts and also showing how we might take advantage of our flow-through behavior in a switch statement.